So today I will be showing how you can use Impulse Sync and use its manipulators to access the Impulse Sync ID mapping and be able to create reference fields out of fields that may not be references, such as like a string field or maybe some JSON that has an ID in it, but we need to create a proper reference field from it. So what we'll see here is we have an author that we're going to be migrating, where we're going to migrate their picture and their title, their name, to a destination where we are going to, again, have a couple of these fields populated, such as the contributor image and the name. Now, what we'll see first is we have two jobs configured here. The first job to migrate the asset, and the second job to migrate the author themselves. So quickly looking at the configuration for the asset job, we'll see it's kind of a standard asset job where we have our source configured to pick up our asset specifically. We also have our destination endpoint configured to migrate it over and where to. And we don't have any manipulators or mapping for this job because we're just simply interested in migrating the single asset. Now, what we will see is we have our author job configured as well. And if we take a look at its configuration, we'll see again, we have our source endpoint configured to pick up the author themselves specifically, and our destination endpoint configured for where we're going to migrate it to. Now, we do have some manipulators. We do have an add replace manipulator where we're adding a field name here, adding a name, using some pre-existing values. But we're more interested at the moment in our liquid field manipulator. And what we're doing here is we're actually going to be creating a reference field for that contributor image field using a liquid template. Now, I want to show how you can use our liquid playground and our debugging report tools to be able to build a liquid template like this. So what we'll see is I've actually run a couple debug reports for this job. So what we'll see here is this first debug report. I'm going to go ahead and take what is the original content and put it in our test liquid template. Now, we have this data populated here. We can start writing out our liquid template as necessary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of this extra templating we have at the moment and start at the basics. So what we'll see is we can start by typing out for what we want and start adjusting and working with our liquid template. So we'll apply our language, and we know what we're actually looking for is the picture field, and this is where we want to start. So if we test this, you'll see that we have our value, which is actually a JSON value, and we'll be able to make use of some of the filters to parse out what we want here. Now, because we want to take what is the picture, which is basically this large JSON object, and turn it into a reference field, what we need is what's called the FID value from this JSON. Now, this is dependent on, obviously, the system and the content that you're picking up, but in this case, we're interested in what is the FID attribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start typing out FID. We'll test this, and voila. There we can see we have our FID value being output. Now, what we're going to be making use of is a filter in liquid template that we've created that's called ID map. And what this will do is allow you to take an ID value with some configuration and return the mapped ID value from Impulse Sync. So because we had that asset job, we previously migrated the asset over from our source to our destination. Impulse Sync automatically tracks what the ID is mapped to from the source system to the destination system. And we're going to make use of that knowledge that Impulse Sync has with the ID map filter. So what we need to do is get the correct ID value to send to Impulse Sync to return what ID value we want, the mapped ID value. So what we're going to do is, because we're using this Drupal source system, we're going to need to actually prepend the value impulse asset colon as most IDs, as the ID from the Drupal source system always has the content type, 2 colons, and then the actual ID value. So let's go ahead and test this, and we'll see we're closer to what we want. Now we do have these extra, because from JQ, the value from JQ, when prepended or appended, has these brackets around it. So we'll go ahead and write out section to remove these brackets. And let's go ahead and actually take our section and apply it here. We'll see now we have our impulse asset colon and our FID. This is the value we want to send to our ID mapping filter. So using our continuing to build this out, we'll go ahead and use ID map, and we'll be able to pass in, obviously we have our ID properly created. We also need the ID path. In this case, this is just the content ID, the primary ID of the content. That's the map, the ID we want to return the map for. And we need the source and destination content type this asset or content was migrated as. Now, remember I said that we were migrating an asset, so our source content is going to be this content type based on the system. And our destination content, because we didn't use any mapping, is also going to be impulse asset. So what we are going to need to do is make use of a debug report to test to make sure that this ID map filter and value is working as expected. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at what we're looking for. What we'll see here is a completed debug report of the full template that we have written, where our contributor image field, that's the field we're creating, no longer has impulse asset and the FID. Instead, we have this other asset, which is the ID for the asset in our destination system. Now notice how we created we have relations rather than, and child IDs rather than just a value. And what we did here is we're actually making use of another of the Liquid template features, where we're able to create an actual notation field. Now, we do have in our Liquid template, we do have support for the notation relationship field object, where if we quickly use that, and we'll remove these, what you'll see here is it spits out a little JSON object similar to what we just saw with the parent ID and the child ID. And we have some text where we need to insert the child ID value. So what we're going to want to do is actually assign a variable. So we'll do assign, and we'll call it asset ID equal to this Liquid templating value, where we take it, parse out the ID we want to send to the ID map, actually perform the ID map, and actually then have assign that to the variable asset ID. Now, we'll be able to go ahead and insert asset ID as a little Liquid template right here into the rest of this static JSON object. And what we'll see here, if we go ahead and close this tester, we'll see what is very similar to what we just wrote, where we have our asset ID variable being assigned based on our picture value using the JQ filter to find the FID. We'll section out some unnecessary string values, and we'll prepend the impulse asset, because this is the ID that we need to send. We'll send it to the ID map filter, where we want to get the content.id pathed ID map, and our source and destination content type is impulse asset for this ID map. And then notice here we have that JSON object being built, where our parent ID value is set as the content.id from the content that we're migrating, and our child ID is set to that asset ID that we've assigned up here. And again, we're creating this contributor image field. Now notice we do have this optional value as well, the impulse field value. This tells the manipulator to actually treat our liquid template as a full field rather than just a small singular value. We want to actually convert this little bit of JSON into a full field for the content to be migrated. Now, once we have that, I went ahead and ran that a debug job, and that's how I was able to test that we do have the appropriate contributor image field as we're looking for, where we have the correct child ID value that we want to actually reference at the destination. Running this job, what we'll see is we can first look at, we have our asset for our user, and we have an entry here under contributor where our author now is created. And if we go ahead and look at the author itself, we'll see we have the, such as the contributor name and display name now populated. And even we have our contributor image properly referenced because we were able to use our liquid templating to build the reference to that file. Now, one thing to comment is that the liquid template is versatile, and while I was able to do this using just the IT map, there may be options or reasons to instead make use of impulse sync storage to store ID values or other types of values and retrieve those to actually build other types of reference fields as necessary. Thanks for watching.